Here we go.
Thank you. Excellent. Welcome, Marnie.
And there we have it. Yeah, very good.
We will start the meeting momentarily, just making sure we have everyone who wants to be in, and then we will get going. Okay, the numbers have been stable here for a minute or so, let us begin with, I now call this meeting of the South Beach School District School Board to order. We will begin with our land acknowledgement, and then I will do some discussion of public comment, and we'll get in with the rest of our agenda. So first of all, South Whidbey School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, originally known as Shukochi, in Lushootseed of the coastal Salish peoples, on the lands of the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial and have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the Indigenous people of this territory and for their enduring care and protection of the land in which we currently occupy and share through the Treaty of Point Elliott, signed by 82 tribes in Mukilteo on January 22nd, 1855. Before we move on to the other points in the agenda, we expect to hear a great many public comments, and we welcome those comments. With the number of emails that have come into the school board and the school district over the past few weeks, we want to remind participants of some ground rules. First, this is a meeting of the school board in public, not a community forum. We encourage public comment, but we ask that all comments be directed to the school board, not to other community members. Two, all comments must be accompanied by the member of the public's name and where they live. The general area like Clinton, Freeland, or Langley is fine. We will not read anonymous comments. Three, please keep all comments to the appropriate topic. The public comment section is the area for comments about topics not on the agenda. I will remind folks that we are a civility first school district, so please keep in mind that while we can debate and discuss ideas, we do not attack those speaking the ideas. I will now move on to the approval of the agenda and minutes as presented. They have been presented here in the agenda, which is available on the website, as always. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda and minutes as presented?
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded twice. All those in favor of approving the agenda and minutes as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. The agenda and minutes as presented have been approved. I will now move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, I will move on to votes. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed, please say nay. The consent agenda has been approved as well. We have new business upcoming, but first we have public comments. Please use the Q&A function of the webinar to present any comments. I will read them and Dr. Moshe or myself or whoever is appropriate will respond to them. It may be for some comments where we just acknowledge them because we want to hear your opinion, but don't need to make a comment on it. If it's a specific question and we have the information, we will respond to it. If not, we will ask you to email or get your contact information and get back to you as usual. While I'm waiting to see if any public comments come in, we do have 2 comments that were emailed to the board with a request to read them. I will read them now. The first is from Colleen Davenport Paysinger from Beverly Hills High School, who works in Beverly Hills High School, California. She says, as an alumni of this district, grad year 1993, I've written and participated many different times in the district business, usually in regards to teachers and keeping the progress of education moving forward. I was shocked and disheartened to read an opinion piece in the local digital newspaper in which videotaped segments of classroom discussions and teaching were obviously recorded on a cell phone, then distributed to community members and then published to the general public. As a public education teacher myself using Zoom currently, I know that recording any segment of a class with minors and then publishing it without permission of said minors is a problem for school district leadership. So I assume that this school board takes this situation very seriously, in that one of your duties is to protect students while in your care. Second, I want to learn more about who and why the comment to teachers in the district was to stay neutral about the January 6, 2021 historical event. I'm wondering how many times has that directive been given and what other instances fall under the category of stay neutral. I'm wondering if the Charlottesville protest of August 2017 was one of the stay neutral topics. What about the death of George Floyd? It's about as crazy as saying that teachers should stay neutral about Malcolm X or Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. or the murder of Robert Kennedy. History has its eyes on you and us as educators. Classrooms are full of amazing opportunities to share, listen, debate, and hear opposing views, and it's a place where honesty and facts matter. I finally want to commend Mr. Eager and any other teacher who shared, listened, and debated with students about the historical events of January 6th and any other event that students want to discuss. Teaching is the greatest job a person can have on earth. Sharing knowledge and ideas with this amazing new generation of students who are ready to change the world is the best part of teaching in today's world. Thank you for your time. That's from Colleen Davenport Paysinger. As I said before, we always appreciate input. Is there anything that anyone on the board or Dr. Moshe feel like they need to respond to in that?
I would just refer to our controversial issues policy around the question regarding stay neutral. Other than that, no, I had no comment. Appreciate the input.
And for reference, that policy is policy 2331, available on our website. I have one more comment and one more emailed in comment, and then I see we are beginning to get Q&A from those on the line right now. So on to this one and then start reading comments from those others. This one is from Charlene Davenport, who's a South Obi resident. There has been recent concern regarding the current events class of Mark Eager and what he said during the class. First, I have a concern that a cell phone video was taken of Mr. Eager in his class meeting the day after the Capitol riots and then sent to other people. In the Beverly Hills School District, this is illegal. Students sign a contract stating they will only use Zoom and not record or videotape discussions, and the district has filed charges in cases where the contract was violated. I don't know what the policy is for South Whitby. You might want to look into this. Second, Mr. Eager did nothing wrong and he should not be reprimanded for any reason. He gave actual facts trying to generate discussion in his class to look at both sides of what happened the day of the insurrection in the Capitol. If only one student responds to what he's commenting upon, that isn't his fault. If you want to cut out controversial current events subjects, then why even have a current events class? We want to encourage students to participate in the governmental process to learn about both sides of an issue or event, and then use their critical thinking skills to make a decision on what they think is right. If some parents only want one side to be taught to students, then we no longer have a democracy. That is from Charlene Davenport. The only comment I have on that is that we do not comment publicly on personnel matters. And that is a matter of privacy within the district and with teachers. Now we have comments in from the community. The first one is, we have two here from Aaron Rodriguez. I do not have an address on here. I recognize the name though. I will read it. Aaron, could you please put a comment in with your location as well, and I will add that to the record. The first comment is, will the school board please affirm its stance on anti-racist education? And for that, I will refer to our equity policy, which is policy 0001, which references that directly. Aaron Rodriguez notes, I'm in Langley. Thank you, Aaron, for that. Second question from Aaron is, please clarify Zoom guidelines in high school classes. Is recording and publicly publishing allowed?
I can answer that, Brooke. Students are provided with and have signed an agreement that they would not record those Zoom classes. We are unclear as to who recorded and posted that. The individual who sent that information to the district with those video clips has been notified and told that it is they should be destroyed and that they should not be in any public forum. In terms of the district did not violate the student's right to privacy. An individual did, and it was unauthorized. But we've been unable to, other than the person who sent it having said they received it from someone else, that's not tracked. That's where we are on that. Totally agree that the students know not to record those lessons and that they're for educational purposes only. And
can you clarify that it's the students that sign this, or is it the parents that sign this?
the student and family, it goes home to the family, the parent signs it as well.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the clarifying question, Damien. Sarah Chappelle, Freeland says, I share the privacy and protection concerns of the first public comment. Do we have legal counsel to pursue the legality of the privacy breach? And I believe that Dr. Moshe has
We
already
did.
responded to
Yep.
that.
Mhm.
And also asked, have the parents of the students in Mr. Eager's class been notified?
I'd have to check with Mr. Patton on that. I don't know the answer to that question.
I have a question in 4 parts here that follows from Miriam Coates in Clinton. I'll try to read it quickly so that we can stay within our guidelines for time limit. I'd like to comment on the progress report on affirmative action goals to be presented this evening. In an article published in the Record in September, Dr. Moshe is quoted saying, we are working to be an anti-racist organization, yet the affirmative action plan for this district has only 3 goals: to analyze hiring, to increase female administrative leadership, to continue an ongoing process of education on equity, and to prevent gender discrimination in employment. Despite the district's focus on equity, inclusion, acceptance, and education, which helps build a solid foundation leading to affirmative action, building a diverse teaching and administrative staff is not a stated goal. I find it appalling that increasing diversity and equity is not a goal on the district's affirmative action plan. There is only a recommendation to increase staff diversity to match student diversity. In a letter from the superintendent to the community on equity, posted on the district's website and signed by Dr. Moshe and administrators, it states that we know our students of color need to see teachers of color as well. I agree that students of color benefit from representation, but the district statement is narrow-minded. All students and staff benefit from diverse learning and working community. Let's look at the numbers in this report. 20% of students in the district identified as non-white. 100% of staff and administration identify as white, which, by the way, should not be capitalized. In the letter to the community, Dr. Moshe blamed the lack of diversity in teaching staff and administration on distance and lack of housing, claiming that we struggle to receive applications from a diverse population. So I looked at the numbers in this progress report. This year, there were 158 applicants for teaching or administrative positions. 13 applicants, or 12%, identified as Black, Hispanic, Asian, or multiracial. None were hired. If this report's finding on applicants are similar to previous years, that would mean that in the past decade of Dr. Moshe's tenure, over 100 non-white applicants were denied offers of employment in a district with 20% of students identifying as non-white. And this is despite letters to the community from the superintendent on equity, a student petition from Jackson Murphy asking the district for race and hate speech education signed by over 5,000 community members, and a recent approval to offer race and ethnic relations coursework pushed again by student leadership. My admiration to these student activists. Somehow the district cannot find one non-white candidate it deems as worthy of employment for years. Why is that? And before anyone states that hiring from a 12% pool is challenging, please keep in mind that OSBI reports that over 80% of Washington teachers identify as white. So 12% rate of non-white applicants isn't shocking, especially considering the South End's housing options. For a district aiming to be an anti-racist organization, the Affirmative Action Plan progress report will be presented tonight is shameful. I urge the board and superintendent to revise the Affirmative Action Plan aiming to build staffing that reflects the student population should be a top priority. And the board and superintendent should reflect on the hiring practices and culture they are responsible for that finds non-white candidates to not be a good fit, and to take steps to dismantle the structural and systemic racism that has long been pointed out in this district. Okay, I'd like to note, first of all, that we do go into more detail in our equity policy that was approved this summer. Beyond that, Dr. Moshe, do you have any comment you'd like to make on any part of that?
No, I would think the board would want to discuss the affirmative action plan when it's presented in tonight's agenda. I have no comment at this time.
I agree that that is a worthy thing to be discussing, which would be why it's ready to be discussed. Aaron Rodriguez of Langley, thank you for clearing it up. I appreciate you all. I will ask the high school principal to revisit the paperwork that we all signed regarding Zoom. It is not easily available on the website. That's exactly the proper route to take on that, I do believe. Preston Osman, Freeland, Washington. I would like to acknowledge the United Student Leaders' consistent dedication to progressive values, inclusive education, and active participation in the process of dismantling systemic racism, which rears its ugly head in this community and public school systems in this country at large. These students are a shining example of the way in which young voices can and should be centered in conversations about what is best for them, their academic lives, and futures. I also would like to thank the school board for listening to these students, and I hope that you continue to do so in the future. Thank you, Preston. It's we've been meeting with United Student Leaders for 4 months now.
Yeah, we've been meeting every month and we will continue to do so.
I have found it incredibly valuable for seeing how our policies reach the students and seeing what matters to admittedly a select group of students, but self-selected group of students, but to some of the students. I think it's incredibly valuable to see how policies directly impact students. So thank you, Preston, for noting that. Sarah Chappelle asked, will the district release a statement with reaffirming the policy did not record or publish class sessions?
Yes, I think that's a great suggestion, and we will do that.
Okay. That is the last Q&A currently in our queue. As has been our habit while we're here on Zoom, if more things come in, we will address them when we have time between the agenda of our meetings. Again, this is a meeting of the school board in public. I've got a comment here from Dave Davenport that just came in. Dave, could you send us your location real quick? I will read your comment in waiting for that, while I'm waiting for that information. Dave says, I'm here tonight to show support for Mr. Eager and the South Whidbey School District. Recently, extreme right-wing political activists have attacked the school districts in Island County. Stina Wenzak has made the community aware of an issue at South Whidbey High School. Her complaint has a couple valid points, but Dave says that most of it is unfounded and she has since walked back her stance on the majority of the complaint. Ironically, she did not have her historical facts correct on certain points while she was attempting to link Mr. Eager, a history teacher, with Marxism and communism. I applaud Mr. Eager for taking full responsibility for any missteps regarding boundaries set by the school district. I applaud the school district for maintaining their policy on handling individual or staff concerns and for addressing the issue directly and clearly in the South Whidbey record. I support Mr. Eager and the statements he presented to his students regarding the lies and deception of the previous U.S. administration. It cuts off there. I will note, thank you, South Whidbey School Board and Mr. Eager, for handling this professionally. I stand with you in your desire to educate our children with facts to ensure all of our children are multiculturally engaged and for bringing awareness to anti-racism within this small, mostly white community desperately needs. Dave Davenport Langley, a former K-12 student in South Whidbey School District and concerned parent of a child enrolled in South Whidbey School District. Thank you for the comment, Dave. We will go back to, we do not comment on personnel matters, and with that, again, thank you for the comment. Okay, we are once again down to no open questions, so let's move on to new business. We can answer any further ones that come up during the report section. Our first item of new business is Memorandum 2021 number 18. That is the, sorry, just a moment. The approval of update policy 2150 co-curricular programming.
Move to approve. Oh.
Okay, I have a move to approve the update. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion to be had here? Most of what was done here, I'll just note, is updates to wording. There's changing will to shall, or shall to will, sorry. Noting male and female students as opposed to boys and girls, all members regardless of gender, just making more inclusive language. Yeah. If there is no other comment or questions, all those in favor of approving the update to policy 2150 co-curricular programming, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. With all ayes and no nays, the update to policy 2150 co-curricular programming has been approved. We'll now move on to Memorandum 2021-19, approval of update policy 2413, equivalency credit opportunities. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve policy 2413.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Is there any comment to be had here?
I would just add that this is one that we rounded out past the workshop. So John, Joe, and Christy, for the most part, went through and filled in all of the South Whidbey specific areas as it aligns to high school graduation.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just scrolling through it briefly myself just to make sure that I'm fully, just to get one last chance of looking at it. Thank you for the update to the wording down there on the third page, student demographic. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor of approving the update to policy 2413 equivalency credit opportunities, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Okay, memorandum 2021-19, the update to policy 2413 has been approved. Next on the list is memorandum 2021-20, approval of update policy 3510, associated student bodies. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve?
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, no comments or questions. All those in favor of approving the update to policy 3510, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The update to policy 3510 has been approved. Now we have memorandum 2021-21, approval of update policy 4300, limiting immigration enforcement in schools. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve policy 4300.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded twice. Is there any conversation or questions to be had? Okay. Then I will move on to all those in favor of updating policy 4300 as indicated, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Okay, the updates to policy 4300 have been approved. The final item on our new business is memorandum 2021-22, approval of update policy 6220, bid or request for proposal requirements. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve policy 6220.
We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved twice, seconded once. Are there any questions or comments? I see the removing gendered language in here, as well as the actual, as well as the specific update date suggested, which is wonderful. Thank you for that. All those in favor of approving the update to policy 6220, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The update to policy 6220 has been approved as well. We'll now move on to the financial enrollment report. Mr. Poolman, please take it away.
Dan, just for logistics, I have you sharing your screen as opposed to Ian. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
So you should be able to see it now.
Yep, it's
Yes.
coming up right now.
Okay. So this is our financial report as of January. We'll start with enrollment first. And as I go through this, if the board has any questions, please, stop me and ask.
Dan, I can only
Yeah.
see about a quarter of your screen, and I'm wondering if it's just me or if it's the same for others.
I have a clear view.
Yep,
Okay,
I
so it's
believe I do
probably
too.
just the size of my screen.
It
So,
could be your view. You can probably pull the gallery over to the side.
yeah, I'll fix it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. So enrollment as of February 1st was roughly 1,148 students, FTE, broken down between the high school, South Woody Academy at the high school, the middle school, the north and south campus at the elementary schools. And you can see that the 1148 is about 16 fewer than we had in January. And as a reminder, enrollment drives funding for school districts, get roughly $10,000 per student FTE. And OSPI counts the September through June enrollment, takes an average, and that's our actual funding for the year based on those numbers. So you can see we started in September with about 1182. We're at 1148 today, and our average so far from September through February is 1170. You can also look at it by grade groupings. K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 gives you the same numbers, but just kind of a visual breakdown of what the buildings look like, how many kids are in the North Campus, South Campus, and the secondary building.
Mr.
Good.
Pullman, if I can ask real quick, have we reached out, have we gotten any feedback from those, particularly the 11 high school students who have withdrawn in the last month, to see if there's a trend in reasoning why?
I do not have an answer for that tonight for you. I can certainly look at that because I am looking at the entire year, just as we move into our budgeting session for next year, and we need to figure out what the enrollment looks like. We are looking at each student and seeing, where they went, when they went, who came in, who went out, because it's a fluctuation throughout the year. So we can certainly talk about that probably next month, but certainly by the following month when we talk about enrollment budgeting, we'll have that information, and it'll be very specific.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. What you can see though is we have budgeted about 1,224 students for this year, and this is the budget we created last fall for the current school year. And predominantly the biggest group is in the elementary school, and it's a kindergarten class, much smaller than we would see in a normal year. But at this point, we are about 53 FTE below our budgeted, and I'll talk about the importance of that in a few minutes. Just some different ways of looking at it, but you can see that we budgeted 1232, we're about 1170. On the right-hand corner, you can see the enrollment by month. So we moved into the second semester, and that's why you see a change at the high school normally, is kids will have completed what they've been working on, and they may or may not move into running start. There's a variety of reasons. The ALE program started with about 12 kids. We're down to about 7 in that. CTE, you can see the second semester, they went from about 48 students to 66. So there are more kids in that program at the high school than there was last semester. And the special education, though it looks like a big change, it's a couple kids. So it's pretty much about 190 throughout the year so far.
So Dan, just to make sure I understood you correctly, you're saying that we are down 70 kids, but the average is 50.
From the budgeted amount.
Correct.
So we're down, we had planned on having fewer kids this year than last year. And when you look at how many kids come in at elementary level at kindergarten versus how many graduates, sometime we might have 110 kids graduating with only 70 coming in. So there's going to be a difference of 40 for those types of reasons. But this is the 53 is from our budgeted amount where we thought we were going to be last fall when we created a budget.
So
We didn't anticipate half a kindergarten class.
Okay.
That's where the majority of it.
There's 20 more than what we budget or anticipated by the budget.
Well, there's actually
24.
53 more, but about 20 more than the kindergarten that we expected, that we saw in September, the drop there. Yeah. This one is, because we do use an annual average for enrollment, I try to anticipate what that annual average looks like. On the left side, the blue bars are actual enrollment, and the red is anticipated. And what I've used is historical data for the last 3 years to see what percent change happens on a monthly basis in a statistical manner that we have seen over the time. And if we use that type of average, and I've used 1 year cohorts, I've used 3 and 5, and they're not that different. But this is based on 3 years. If we use that 3-year average, I'm expecting we will see 1144 next month, then 1139, 1136, a little bit of a jump in June. And that comes out to an average for the year of 1158. And that's what our actual funding would end up being for the year. So we'll watch that on a monthly basis, but that's my best guess at this time. And it's a pattern we see every year. It's very, very standard. You start up at one level and then it declines over time.
Can I just jump in for a sec, Dan?
Sure.
Our colleagues across the state are reporting what kind of enrollment this year?
You mean that they're all reporting
percentage-
enrollment decreases?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty much 6 to 10% enrollment drop across the state in public school.
Yeah, we're about in the middle of that percentage when we compare the schools in our region. Some are dramatically worse off than we are, and some are a little bit better. But yeah, we're about in the middle as far as the change. It's a statewide decrease, and I'm sure it's caused by the pandemic and people, making decisions that they normally would not make in a regular year.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the fiscal financial side of it, this is through January 31st, and a reminder that our fiscal year starts in September and runs through August. We're not on a calendar year. So it's the 5th month of our fiscal year. So we're 42% of the way through the month. Would expect our revenue to be about that level. We're actually at 38%. And I'll kind of tell you what that difference is. If you look at the lower left corner, you're going to see that the blue line, which is this year's revenue, was following last year's almost exactly until we hit January. And there's a real reason for that. When we do our budget, OSPI pays us based upon budgeted enrollment numbers from September through December. We hit January and they do what they call truing up. They take the actual numbers and they recalculate your revenue based on that. And I'll show you in a minute what those numbers are and the differences you'll see. So the reality is they overpaid us based on the actual enrollment from September through December, and now they're adjusting that. And that's why you see a drop in January that is not consistent with what we've seen in prior years. So year to date, if you look at the revenue in the right-hand corner, we are about $600,000 less than we were last year at this particular time. And it's not all enrollment. There's some other pieces in there, and we'll talk about that. So this is what our report from OSPI looks like on a monthly basis. This is our December report. You see regular apportionment, which is our basic ed funding, which is predicated upon the number of students we have times, roughly $10,000. We were projecting to create revenue of a little over $12.2 million. And that was what our budget calculated. Well, in January, based on our actual enrollment, they recalculated that number, and we now see that it's 11.7 million. So there's about $500,000 difference between the December and the January amount. And since they had paid us on a higher dollar amount for those first 4 months, when they adjusted it, you'll see, there's a negative 0.71 in there. So we're getting 844,000. Last month we got 1.1 million. So they're starting to adjust that dollar amount and taking that away through time. And they will continue this process, counting the enrollment, recalculating this dollar amount on a monthly basis until we hit June. That's our last month that they actually count enrollment. So these are just reports of where we are, how close are we to budget. What I would point out on the lower side, and this is why we're looking at $600,000 less revenue year to date from last year. One is the local revenue. Local revenue are the dollars we generate in our buildings and the dollars we generate through the rental of the community center. Those rental dollars have been down. And the fact that we don't have a lot of kids in school, we're not generating the typical costs or revenue that we'd have, such as food service. In a normal year, we'd have kids buying lunches, paying full price. That's local revenue. The federal government has allowed us to use a summer feeding program where every child eats for free this year. So we have no paid revenue for food service, which was local funds, but you'll see that our federal funds are higher because we're getting reimbursed by the federal government for all the meals that we're serving. So it's a shift in there, but it has reduced our local revenue from, Last year at this time, we were at 359,000. Now we're 121,000. So it's a couple $100,000 difference between what we would normally generate. We don't have kids in buildings with, fees and all the things that normally we would see revenue coming in. That's very limited in this modality. The other one is the state, the big one in the middle, that state apportionment based upon student FTE. You can see that it's down about $300,000 year to date, and it's fewer kids, generates fewer dollars. Same thing with the state special purpose. Those are predicated on enrollment numbers also, so they're down a little bit, and then the federal dollars are up a little bit. Then we move into the expenditures, and that's the kind of the other half of the equation. If we are 42% of the way through the year, in a typical year, our payroll is about 42% of our budgeted expenditures. And you can see it's about 37%. If you look at the 3 previous years in the bottom lower left corner, it's almost identically 42% every single year. We know what those costs are going to be. We create contracts and it's all in there. So the payroll cost is reduced this year. And on the right side is the non-employee cost. That's our supplies, services, and travel. And that is also down. Typically, we've been in the 32 to 42% range. This time of the year, we're at 22%. So based on the remote learning, we're not spending as much money as we normally would for supplies, utilities, a variety of different categories that would usually be in there. So if we look at the expenditures, you can see the black line, which is the current year. Would expect to be similar to the red line that's up there, but it has been traditionally lower every single month. And part of that's a lower payroll cost, and part of that's a lower supplies services. If we include the encumbrances, and these are the things that we know that we have to pay, predominantly it's going to be contracts or salaries and benefits. And sometimes it's going to be the non-employee costs that we have ordered but haven't received. But our payroll is about 87%. Our non-employee costs about 58%. So we're about 83% of that. And you'll see by looking at that lower right corner, that the red, the green, and the darker blue, those are all payroll and salaries and benefits. That's the majority of our costs this year. Typically, we'd see 85% in those categories. This year, we're over 90%. So that tells you we're not spending a lot of money in non-employee costs. We can also quickly look at our expenditures in multiple ways, and we do as a school district. The first one is by activity. And you can see that, teaching activity is kind of the largest chunk that we have in there. And just real briefly, teaching activities are going to be basically instructional costs, teachers, paraeducators, anything that's classroom based, and also our athletic program. And then teaching support is going to be libraries, health services, counselors. Supporting activities is all those activities that aren't directly tied to a particular building. So it's going to be your maintenance cost, your custodial cost, your transportation, food service, all those that are more across the district. And then your building administration and central administration, which includes the board of directors, superintendent, business office, HR, all those type of things. The other way we can look at it, and you can see that the big differences are in teaching activities and the supporting activities, that they are both down this year. The other way you can look at it by object code, and this is the way we normally see it, salaries, benefits, supplies, services, and travel. And you can see that classified salaries are substantially down based upon the method of instruction that we have today. Supplies are down, purchase services are down, and travel is almost non-existent. In a Zoom world, we don't go many places. And then you can look at it by program, and you can see that our basic education program's down some. Our special education program, we're still spending the same amount of money, even though we are doing it differently in there. And the other one is the support services at the bottom. And again, that's things like transportation, food service, utilities, etc. Quick look at revenue versus expenditures. You can see in January, we have less revenue than we have expenditures, and that happens most months except for October and in the spring when we collect levy collections. Budget status report, just looks at the different revenue sources and the different program, which we've already looked at. But you see year to date, we've generated about 7.9 million in revenue and about 7.4 million in expenditures, what leaves us with a fund balance of about $4.2 million. We also can look at the balance sheet, which is an asset and liability, very typical. On the top is the things that, have money attached, and the middle part is the expenditures that go with it, and comes up to the same fund balance. And we have those for each of our funds. Fund balance, it's a percent of our expenditures. You can see it is up this year. It started up. If you look at August, being closed part of the last year allowed it to actually increase, and it has basically stayed there. It's following the same pattern, but it just started at a higher point. And you had asked me last month about fund balance and what my thoughts were. So we'll look at that a little bit. When I start looking at where I think fund balance is going to be, I start with revenue. And I know that we're going to have fewer kids, and every child FTE is $10,071.12. So if we look at potentially 66 fewer students, that's about 660,000. The transportation budget is predicated upon the number of miles we drive, the number of kids we transport. In this environment, we're not transporting many kids. And we've gone through our reporting cycles. So I'm expecting that's going to be a reduction of $400 and some thousand. And the other one is local funds, which we talked about. Less revenue locally in those different categories, whether it's a rental from the community center or if it's student fees or food service, whatever. So I estimate that our revenue will end up closer to about $19.4 million rather than the $20.8 million that we had budgeted in there. And it's for those specific reasons. On the expenditure side, we have spent about 7.4 million year to date. We've encumbered about 10.2 million. And then I went through all the expenditure accounts and tried to identify what costs I believe we still will have, though there's some we will have that I'm not aware of this time. But I was able to identify about $1.8 million. And that's things like we have a second risk management insurance payment to make. There's unemployment, which going into this year, we weren't required to make any unemployment payments because we had a balance at the ESD. That has changed this year. So we are actually making substantial unemployment payments. Most of our classified employees have vacation that they cash out in the spring. That's a dollar amount. There's sick leave cash outs, and those are sometimes quite large as people retire who have been here for 30 years. Contract addition and changes. As we move back to in-person, we are bringing back employees, whether they're bus drivers, custodians, additional hours for building staff, that type of thing. I don't know what those all are yet. We're still working on that part. Substitutes, we don't encumber substitutes because we don't know when we're going to need them, who we need them. Sometimes that's a very substantial cost for the district. And then there's programs like the Esser funds, Running Start, Title IV, Title II, Highly Capable. Those aren't encumbered, but we have to spend them. If we don't spend them, we return the revenue. So those are expenditures I know we will have. And then the athletic program, which normally we would encumber that in the beginning of the year, but not knowing what that looked like, we haven't done that yet. And typically that's at least $250,000 alone just for that particular aspect of it. So those are some of the things that I believe. So based on that, we're looking about $19.4 million in expenditures. So it looks like our revenue and our expenditures are going to balance. Even though we have less revenue, it looks like we're going to have less expenditures. So I think our fund balance is going to be about the same at the end of the year as it was the beginning of the year, unless there's things that we do that I'm unaware of at this time. And again, I predicate this saying this is as of January. This is where I believe we are. And we watch it as we go through the year and we'll have a better idea. The other funds we do have, just so you're aware, our projects fund has about $1.4 million in it. We have about $500,000 encumbered with projects at this time. The debt service has a little over 78,000. ASB, about 42,000. We're not seeing much revenue or expenditures because there's not a lot of ASB activity in the way we're operating at the moment. Transportation Vehicle Fund, it's for the purchase of school buses, so we will be looking at that. And then the Private Purpose Trust Fund, money given to the district on behalf of student scholarships. And then it's a program where we can only spend the interest and not actually the principal on that, so it happens every spring. Any questions I could answer for you about this?
I just wanted to thank you for doing the work on making those estimates, Mr. Pullman. I very much appreciate your best estimates on looking ahead.
Yeah, and we will look at that every month. We may not need to share it, but it's a process we do every single month to make sure we're where we believe we're going to be. So if we are done, I will stop sharing this and bring up the affirmative action. Oops. Joe, are you doing this?
No, this is yours. You created it.
No. It just that no.
I didn't touch it. No, I didn't touch it, Dan.
Okay, it just changed on me. It's just okay.
I don't know. There you go.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. I do want to make one clarification. This affirmative action plan is directly related to policy 5010, which is non-discrimination and affirmative action. And it is specifically about employment decisions, recruitment, hiring, transfers, and dismissal of employees. So it's not an equity report as far as the progress we're making towards equity. It's really related to employment practices. And that's why you're seeing what you see in this thing. And actually, you know, Amanda did a lot of this work, so she included some other things in there about equity, but it's really about employment process. That's really what policy 5010 talks about. And we do a 5-year affirmative action plan. This one was created in 2016, runs through 2021, and then we will have a new one starting in 2022, and we'll identify potentially, you know, other issues. I don't know what they will be at that time, but this is the 2016 to 2021 plan. So basically, in that plan, one of the things that was identified was that, and it was even worse at the time, was that we had a very few women who were administrators in the district. And so that was one of our goals, was to try to increase that. There's no openings this year, so that hasn't changed. We currently have 2 is all. But really a lot of this work is about process. It's about reviewing job descriptions, documentation to make sure that there's not a bias in the application and hiring process, that the demographic data or anything that might help the interviewer identify gender, race, anything else is not in the documentation. And that the whole process is really about making that work fair. And you'll see it's here, and it's also in another section where it talks about the hiring process. But it's really, when we talk about this affirmative action plan goal, it's really employment related, and how do you create a process that's fair and open and doesn't have biases in it as much as possible. So that's really what we're talking about. The goal of education and training, Amanda put a lot of different trainings in there, and also about the equity training. And really that's just kind of a basis or an underpinning for the affirmative action work. Is if you're trying to understand what those biases are and those different barriers that you might have in the employment process, this helps support that. So it's really that type of work. And then did want to note that the website is, Christy's constantly putting updated information and resources that are available to students, staff, people that want to apply with the district, whatever it might be. So there's that information. The preventing employment discrimination, that's really the same conversation we had up above. How do we create a process that is going to be open and fair and gives every person that applies, that equal footing so that they're not discriminated against. And yes, as was reported earlier, we have a staff that identifies as white. It's very, very predominant there. And that's, one of the things that we're working on is how do we get, more applicants that actually match our student data. And again, it's through that process so that when we do the interviews and we do the screenings, that we're not, eliminating people based on whatever reason might be cultural or, whatever it is that would do that for them. Again, see the number of applications we have. Looks like a lot of applications, but the reality is we hired 4 teachers, 1 paraeducator, and 2 coaches. So out of all of those applications, we only had 7 positions that were available, and 4 of those were teaching positions that were very specific. And it just breaks down, gender, protected age status, and race. So, and the recommendations as we continue is to try to increase our staff diversity to match our student diversity, and then just keep working on training so that we keep equity as a focus in the process. Any questions I could try to answer for you on the affirmative action? But I do want to, make sure people understand it's really about employment process. It's not about anything else.
I think that one thing we can also pay attention to is the pipeline, particularly for administrative positions. Having Mrs. Phillips in as a intern, administrative intern, has been great for hitting our the first point on that as well. Not just finding outside candidates who are female or non-white, but also trying to encourage them from within, I think is fantastic. And I think that that's a great thing that we've been doing that I think should be identified.
One of the things that also should be noted is the increase in our recruiting efforts to go far and wide and increase the pool of applicants. We're a district of very few open positions pretty typically. So we've been working a lot on getting out to, at least prior to COVID, getting out to other organizations in person and trying to do some recruiting to get folks to come to Whitby. So I want to really thank Amanda and Dan, but I know Amanda's done a lot of this work as our HR administrative person to really reach out and try and bring in applicants from a variety of backgrounds. So.
And Brooke, I think I would also just add that in the equity policy, we really focused a lot on training for interviews and focusing in on implicit bias awareness. And beyond that, also looking at ways to not only attract but retain employees of diversity. And I think that given that that is new work to the district and a new focus of the district to be initiated, that takes time for that to come full circle. But I remember back when we shifted this goal, and it was because we did not have a lot of women in administration, and we had a lot of women in teaching positions and in paras positions and in other areas of the district. And so our administrative staff was not reflective of the district. And I think that Joe has done a wonderful job building that capacity. And when we look at what the gender makeups are at our building, they're getting pretty even. And, even seeing 10 male teachers at an elementary school is pretty unique. And so I think that there is a lot of work that has been done on this front, and I think it is good work that has been done.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Andrea, I don't know that I could say it any better. I just wanted to speak to the culture that we invite new staff and administrators into, and how the work that's currently underway in the South Liberty School District will serve to make a more attractive employment opportunity for diverse candidates in future. So in addition to looking at how we can shift policy and focus on our outreach and our recruitment strategies, I think the ongoing work to learn and embody an anti-racist stance is going to create the kind of culture that additional staff members who come from Black, Indigenous, and communities of color will feel safe stepping into.
I certainly can't say it any better than Andrea or Marnie did. Wonderfully stated. Thank you both.
Okay.
Are there any other comments on this? Particularly, I'd like to note Jordan, our student representative. Do you have any thoughts on this that you'd like to share?
No, I personally don't have any thoughts. Yeah, just like what Andrea said, Emery, Arnie said.
May I
Thank you.
just point out a typo on item 2 on the top of the first page? Gauge, G-A-G-E, should be gauge, G-A-U-G-E. Thank you.
Sure.
Damien or Ann, any comments? No? I'm getting head shakes and thumbs up. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Poolman, Dr. Moshe for presenting, Mr. Poolman for presenting, Dr. Moshe for the support on that. We do have some community comments, but I'm going to save those until after the superintendent's report. And then before the board members report, we'll go on to that. So, Dr. Moshe, take it away.
Okay, is my screen share? What are you
We're
seeing?
seeing your desktop and Zoom and the,
Okay, let me, there, all right, how's that?
there we go.
Okay. It's the drawback of having 2 screens, and now I put the wrong one up. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I'll get there. Coming, just a minute. Okay, oh my goodness. All right, are you seeing this one? The board update? Do I have
Yep.
the correct?
Good. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, education in a pandemic, here we go. We've seen this many times before in terms of our goals, where we are in metrics. First priority, as always, is the safety of our students and staff and a robust education. So here's where we are at this moment. Very exciting week. We brought back our 1st and 3rd graders this past Monday. Lots of smiling faces on teachers and on students. So we were really happy. Things went quite well in terms of logistics, checking students in, making sure the health attestations were done. Everybody was wearing masks. It looked good, and people were really happy. We return 2nd grade this coming Monday. Then we'll move on to 4th through 6th on the 8th of March and 7th through 12 on March 15th. And we are looking really good metrics wise. If you look at this arrow, we are now between moderate and low. I didn't put it quite in low because our test positivity is at not less than 5 yet, but it's at 6. So we're quite close to being in the low range. Here's the actual data from Island County. And you'll see here that our 2-week trend again has dropped. And that is a huge thank you to our community, really, because so goes our metrics, so goes our community. So everybody wearing masks, staying 6 feet apart, and keeping COVID away is what's causing these numbers to drop. And that's really good news. You can see from over the course of months that we've really reduced transmission in our area. So you can see the positivity rate, as I mentioned, 6%. So we're close. We've been teetering just above and below 5% on that. Hospitalizations look good. So our county is doing quite a good job. I want to talk a little bit about our mitigation efforts, because this one, I was surprised today in my Island County call, because just one sec, because what I was told, and this may surprise staff as well, but what I was told is that schools do not have outbreaks because of students bringing it in to staff. Where they see, and it's minimal, but where they see outbreaks are staff to staff, because folks get comfortable, they see people every day, they take off their mask, and then that's where COVID comes into play. So really emphasizing that we must all wear masks at all times in every area of the school, unless you're alone in a room with the door closed. Maintaining distance, hand washing, cleaning, ventilation, these are all really important mitigation efforts that we are doing already. And as of today, we have applied for a testing mitigation effort, which is new. It's a free program offered through the Gates Foundation with the Department of Health. I signed us up for it, and we'll see if we're a good candidate. They will get back to us within the next couple of weeks. And you can see that it's about having testing available. If someone's in need of it, we can do this for students as well as staff. If there's an exposure at school, or even if we're just have staff who are anxious and worried, they can test themselves frequently, as often as every 2 weeks, they're suggesting. So that is an additional mitigation effort. This is hot off the press. I haven't even shared it with our staff or our unions yet. So I found that out, worked with the nurses on it, and happy about that. Let's see. So another issue that has come up that I want to update the board on. It doesn't require the board's approval, but I want to make sure you're aware of it. And that is the OSPI plan that we are required to submit. And the Esser Funding, that stands for Elementary and Secondary School Relief, those funds will come to us because we submitted this report, not because of what the report says, which was a bit of a miscommunication. And I know that when the governor came out with the announcement around this, it said, you know, schools open and they get funding. We had to submit a plan, and hopefully this is coming up for you. So this plan was submitted this week. Basically, the plan asks the district to affirm that it is following all of the COVID guidelines, that the work sites are safe, that we've worked with our labor group to get a memorandum of understanding, that we've communicated out to our constituency, that we've got a website for COVID-19, that we've taken into account instruction and distancing and masking and transportation needs. We've communicated with families, and if we haven't been able to reach them, we have tried other forms of reaching them, including in our district, we have had folks go out on home visits to make sure that we're getting every family connected. Thanks to Christy, we have a COVID dashboard on our website. You can go there and find out information that's been shared. Every week, we participate and have been participating in data collection, and we will continue to do that. They specifically ask how many students are in school, how many do you intend to have in school, and so on. So we'll continue to answer that for data collection. Then we had to indicate grade levels we plan to offer instruction to, and we had to provide the date that we plan to do that. They do have a column here for start time for full-time in-person instruction. And I wanted to take a moment right now to talk about that a little bit. Right now, we're doing a hybrid model. It's 2 days a week. Students are in school, 3 days a week remote. And we're running that in cohorts. So Monday, Tuesday cohort, Thursday, Friday cohort. The individual student comes 2 days a week, but we're operating a 4-day in-person, with Wednesdays being preparation and cleaning and so on. In the fall, we don't know what that's going to look like. COVID doesn't give us any predictability. However, if things stay the way they are, namely that we maintain a 6-foot distance, we will be in the similar educational format as we are now. There has been some discussion about reducing to a 3-foot or 1 meter distance between students. That's apparently what's happening in Europe. The health department, as of this morning, is not seeing any movement on the Washington Department of Health on that issue, but that doesn't mean that it won't change. So if it does change, we would be able to have full classrooms if it were reduced to 1 meter, for example. If it stays at 6 feet, it's certainly plausible that our days could be longer in the fall if things are going well, but being able to have all of our students in class every day may not be possible. So that is not unique to South Whidbey. That is across the state. Superintendent's meeting that I was at yesterday, we all talked about it. Chris Rakedahl indicated that there's still discussion about it, but again, at the state level, they're not seeing any movement, and that has everything to do with seeing how it goes with vaccination and where we are with disease as we get closer to the fall. I know that's a question that folks are having, so I wanted to make sure we at least talked about it. It's very early. I mean, we're still in February. So the other thing I want to talk about is this part, which is student learning and well-being. And I'll talk about that in a second when I go back to the slide about Esser funds. We've also had to describe how and we heard a long presentation on our social emotional intervention the last time we met, as well as academic intervention. So we had to explain what we're doing for our students in this plan, and also affirm that should we be required to do statewide assessments, that we would comply. Once again, there's discussion at the state level on assessments and requesting a waiver from the federal government. We've not, as a state, been successful in getting that waiver this year, but since the change in administration, they're attempting to get a waiver a little bit different. That the waiver that's being applied for is to do randomized statewide testing to get a sense of where our students are as a state, but to do individual testing at the district level on standardized tests that are appropriate to the district to see where individual students are at. So no answer on that yet, but should there be statewide assessment, the district would be required to participate. So the good news, and Dan left it out of his presentation so I could put it in mine. We talked about it. I wanted to be the bearer of some good news. Filing that template allows us to be eligible for this preliminary allocation of Esser 2 funds. More than $500,000. And the funds are available for our work with students or any other mitigation efforts. What I talked to the administration team about on Tuesday is really looking at what can we do sooner rather than later. Can we run some summer programs that are not strictly academic? Can we do some social emotional work with students? Can we work with the parks to combine with their programs and perhaps create scholarships for students that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford them? Those are the brainstorming ideas that we're starting to talk about. We will also involve some of our community members who are interested in this to talk about what those possibilities may be and how to help individual families. So there'll be a lot of discussion. It's a very quick turnaround. We will get a template from OSPI to respond to for this with a June 1 due date so that we can do some things over the summer. The good news is that we will have until September 2023 to expend the dollars. This is, we have to pay it out and then get reimbursed. It's not funding that we get upfront. They're very specific about what it cannot be used for. So we'll be talking more about what we're doing on that, but that will help us quite a bit with supporting our students with compensatory services or summer program or extra, social work, whatever it is that we think is the necessary services. This will come to you as a board once we put the plan together for board approval. And that will have to be done between the time we get the template in April and the June 1st reporting date. So we're starting now to try and get some ideas together because it's a very quick turnaround. So board questions, comments, discussion on where we are.
As we open it up for the board, I want to note I did mark a couple of community questions as answered because I felt like they were answered by Dr. Moshe's presentation. If you disagree with me, please resubmit the question, particularly the parts that did not get answered. Also, we've got one person, Michael from Freeland, that I do not have a last name for. That being said, board comments, questions, discussion.
I'll just express my gratitude. All of the thoughtful work that's just been presented and the thoughtfulness of the reopening plan and the balance of optimism and rational expectations around what will be possible going into fall. I'm just very grateful for the approach and the sharing, Joe. And I know that as a parent, I'm very, very excited to see one of my kids planning to head back into the building. Mm-hmm. So gratitude to all the teachers and families and administrators who are working to make this possible. Bus drivers who are already going up and down my street.
Thank you.
I have no questions, so I'm going to dip into the Q&A. Some of this was applicable to this, so I'll focus on that first. If I skip over your question, it's because I don't think it relates to this in particular, and we'll get to it later. Gwendy Hastings in Freeland mentioned that she attended the 4th grade orientation today and found it greatly informative. She was happy to hear there will be social Zooms in addition to other activities for the younger grades to participate in. Thank you for the note. I'm sure that the staff are excited about that as well. Also from Gwendy, I was also happy to hear the district, along with WIN, are providing lunches and breakfast to all students. I know our families in our community will greatly benefit from this. I know the Family Resource Center is also able to help out with school supplies. It makes my heart happy to see our community coming together to meet the needs of our students and families. I think that that's one of the most fantastic things about this community is that when the community sees a problem, they work to find a solution. And I'm fantastically proud of the community for doing that. Melissa Wood in Langley asks, is there any information you can give us about how you will split up high school students? I know this is a difficult question, but it is hard for my teens to decide whether or not they want to come back for a hybrid schooling without knowing if they will be attending with any of their friends.
So what I can tell you is that until we know who is attending the high school, all of our schools aren't sure how we're going to be dividing our students. I heard Mr. Patton and I talked today. They begin on the 15th, so they will know more by the 8th in terms of how the students will be split up. May even be sooner than that, but I don't want to overpromise. But he is working on that. As people respond, we'll know more about how we have to divide our students so that the classes are balanced and we don't have more than the appropriate number in a classroom.
So for now, unfortunately, we can't give any details on who will be what days just because we don't know yet.
Correct.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about this particular topic from the board? We do have one other question in the Q&A that we can get to, but I want to focus on one topic at a time. Doesn't look like it. Okay. So Mark Eager in Clinton, what consequence should the district enforce should it be discovered that a student, teacher, parent, or anybody employed or elected by the school district violated the policy by sharing videos for non-educational purposes?
So the district can enforce its policies, any policies on its employees. And students, of course, if there's a disciplinary issue, but in terms of a parent or someone outside the district, that's a very difficult question to answer. We don't have control. As I said earlier, we asked the individual who had shared those videos to remove them. The issue is the privacy of the one student in particular. You could see that particular student. You could not see any other students. So the expectation for the teacher to have privacy is less than the student in that regard. But we record our Zoom lessons and put them in the Google Classroom. And they are available and they're supposed to be only used for educational purposes. So I don't really have an answer in terms of consequence. I mean, we do our best to maintain the privacy of our students.
Okay. Olivia Batcher in Clinton at the 5-6 level, I've emailed and asked for clarification regarding the way the day will run before I make my decision. I've asked for a phone call, but haven't heard back. Dr. Moshe, is this a situation where Olivia should contact you directly?
She certainly can. I know that Jeff has been in touch with her, but we don't have specifics just yet. They do have a schedule for the day, and that's actually up on the website. But I would suggest, again, calling Dr. Jeff. And if that doesn't work, Olivia and I have been in contact many times by email. So.
I have a question from Dante Calabria. I apologize if I mispronounce any names, and I welcome corrections. What would be the consequence if a student recorded and posted in a physical classroom? as opposed to a
That
Zoom.
would go through the building disciplinary action, and they have each building has its own set of consequences, and the high school handbook is online, so one can look at that and see specifically what those consequences might be.
At this point, I'd like to move on to, if there are no further questions for Dr. Mosher from the board, I would like to move on to board discussion on future board meetings, when and how to return to in-person meetings. Dr. Mosher, I believe you actually have something going along.
I do.
Presentation.
I do. I also want to let specifically Olivia know that the 5-6 orientation is actually tomorrow during assembly. So she will get much more information at that. So I did create a little set of slides for the board to facilitate discussion. So let me share that.
And as it's being shared, just the idea behind it is that when we should go back to in-person meetings as a board, as we're having students and staff in our board, in our buildings as well. So that's the discussion at hand here. And
So as luck would have it, the Open Public Meetings Act was suspended over this state of emergency, and it remains that way. But we are now in phase 2 as a county. And because we are in phase 2, there is now information that came directly from WASDA, the Washington School Boards Association. And this is where this presentation is taken from. So lest you think I've plagiarized, I didn't. I'm giving them full credit, but I did pull directly from their Q&A. So the first question, I know that the board has talked about meeting in public because it stated very clearly that, you know, if we ask teachers to come to the public, shouldn't we also come into a public meeting? And I wish it was as easy as yes, you should. But what we have to do makes it more complicated, which is why the board has to decide what it wants to do. You don't have to. It is solely up to the board. And to do it, you must make sure that it complies with the Open Public Meetings Act and that it complies with all COVID mitigation obligations. So here it is directly that you can resume in-person public meetings subject to certain requirements. And the entire thing, this will be posted on our website under the board meetings. So you can link to that document directly. You'd have to limit the occupancy in the room to 25% or 200, which is ever fewer. Everybody's wearing a mask. Everybody's staying 6 feet apart, and it has to be regularly sanitized. You know, for example, if an individual comes up to speak, you have to sanitize the podium between, so on and so forth. If we were to do this and to stay in our current boardroom, basically you could have 20 guests in addition to the board and superintendent. They have a notice in here when you go to the actual document that says except staff. And then when they explain staff in terms of capacity, they're talking about custodial staff, not like that, you know, all of our administrators attend and so on. Employees that attend that are not specifically there to handle logistics would be considered a guest. So in that particular room, you'd be able to have 20 guests. There are 16 requirements and I have them listed. So you have to really look at this and say, is it worth it? Given the fact that tonight, you know, you have some 50 participants, would it be worth it for you to move to in person? So here's what you need to be able to do as a district. And Ian is in the room. He hasn't seen this, but I'm sure he'll have a reaction to it when we get to this bold bullet. But basically, you still have to do the remote option if we go in person. You can't stop doing remote while we remain in this state of emergency, even though the rules are relaxed. So again, 6-foot distance, multiple entrance and exit points, which that room does have. You have to register your attendees, and not just like name and location. They have a list of its name, date of birth, address. We keep that stuff confidential, but it's all about contact tracing. So because you're holding a meeting in public, because you are basically creating a gathering, then you have, as a board, have to take responsibility for registering each and every person. You maintain that information for 28 days, and then you can discard the information, but you have to maintain it, assuming that there's, that you'd have a case, then you'd be able to provide the name of the attendees and so on. We have to offer masks and sanitizer, not hard. And then how staff will participate in the meeting. Can they do so safely? Here's the real hardship that we would have to figure out, which is creating the overflow areas with physically distanced seating. Now, you could switch this to an auditorium. Then you have a whole other set of problems with sound and acoustics. But if you stayed where you were, we'd have to have, let's say, inside classrooms, you'd not just be able to have one way. People would have to have a way to communicate like they do now on Zoom. And then we'd have to have a plan for sanitizing and disinfecting. So, this is totally up to the board, and obviously the board directs the superintendent, and we will do whatever it is that you'd like. But I have to tell you, it is not my recommendation at this time, but we will certainly do it if you request. You cannot say, okay, well, why don't we just come in? We'll meet, we'll be in person, we will set the example, and we'll just let our public participate remotely. You cannot do that. Doesn't mean your public will show up. They may choose to only come in remotely, but we've got to be able to accommodate all of the people who decide to show up in person. So we'd have to have room ready. If we get an overflow, we've got to be able to accommodate that. So if you take it, for example, as tonight, if we had 50 people, we certainly couldn't have them all in the boardroom. We'd have to have at least 2 other locations, maybe more. Right now, we can have about 15 students in a room, socially distanced by 6 feet. So, maybe 3 classrooms. So that's why and here's the link to the FAQ that I'm referring to. That's my perspective on this. Obviously, the board wanted to bring this up, wanted to talk about it, and we will do whatever the board asks us to do. It may take a couple weeks to get the necessary equipment and figure out the logistics, but if that's what the board would like to do, we will figure it out.
Thank you. I really appreciate this information.
Well, I wouldn't ask our teachers and staff to do anything that we wouldn't be willing to do. So if we're asking them to go back, even if it's in a hybrid model, I think that we could even look at that same opportunity. I liked your idea of the auditorium. I also feel that if there's a couple of board members that don't want to be able to meet in person, we're still offering the same format through Zoom. So I think that there is a possibility to consider going back to in-person meetings in some form. I think that we could manage that. I think it's reasonable, but I'm only one of 5, so you have my feelings. I mean, I welcome it. I welcome the kids going back to school, but it's up to the board.
I think for me, I was one of the members who wanted to bring this conversation up. The piece for me that makes me hesitate is I think there's a different conversation between the board meeting in public and keeping things virtual and not being able to do that. For me, just we are asking our parents to send their children. We're asking our teachers to come and teach with the idea that we are limiting the amount of people on campus and the amount of bodies. And it doesn't feel right to me to then say that twice a month we're going to open it up to public, where we are then potentially bringing in, you know, we've consistently had around 60 participants since we went virtual. We're potentially then having 60 people coming into a building and compromising the environment that we're trying to keep very controlled. It would be different for me if we could meet as 5 and keep public virtual.
Logistically, this is probably a question for you, Joe, and for your administrators, but are there classrooms available enough to be able to sanitize? And, you know, again, like Andrea said, we don't want to bring more germs into the building and bring adults into the building and jeopardize, you know, what's a fairly sanitized and really controlled environment. Are the spaces in the tech there to do those overflow rooms and keep everybody really safe, even thinking of entrances and exits and bathrooms and all the things that it takes to host the public in a building?
It would require us to make those things available. Would it be, you know, again, it wouldn't be as easy as this is. So I look at it and say, for what reason? You know, if you want to participate, we have school in session. As board members, if you want to come visit schools and show up and be seen, you know, I'm seeing that as a much more valuable demonstration of board members doing what teachers are asked to do, which is to physically be present. I think that's a different discussion than holding this meeting in person because of the logistics and the fact that you're getting, you know, 48 or 50 participants this way. You know, it seems, I don't know.
I think that
Yeah.
we'll have the same amount of participants through having the hybrid model, but what I'm actually suggesting here is not restricting ourselves to 1 or 2 campuses. We have many facilities that we can look at. And right now we have our community center that is, I don't know how much is vacant or not, but I know that we're not collecting rent or whatever. And I'm not even sure if the children's theater right now is operating, and that's another auditorium. So I was just throwing out, there's options available. We still have the hybrid available with Zoom. We still have the ability for us not to be in a particular school where students are coming. That would hopefully satisfy Andrea's concern. We have many options to look at, and I just think that those are the things that we have to consider through this whole process. But I think the biggest thing is to lead by example, and that's part of it, is showing our example and stepping out and getting back to a sort of normalcy. So that's how I feel.
I want to thank Damien for the creative thinking around what kinds of facilities might be at our disposal. So that is a very interesting perspective that I appreciate. I have 3 other thoughts. One is, I do share the concern that inviting public meetings at a regular interval does reduce the sort of sanitation protocol that's in place to keep our students and families and staff safe. And so I would have concerns that we're exposing those families who are participating in hybrid learning to greater risk if we choose to shift to these in-person board meetings. I also am curious whether the accessibility would be an obstacle for people with auditory, with hearing impairments. For instance, I'm a person with a hearing impairment, and I can't understand a lot of what is shared from a stage in some large room settings unless the acoustics are very good. And so I just worry about reduced effectiveness of communication with that hybrid model if, for instance, speakers are trying to project to a large room and participate on the Zoom interface. I feel that one or the other could be challenging, and trying to do both could be particularly challenging, especially for those who might be hard of hearing. And then finally, I just want to ask what the need or the expressed interest is in our community. So I wonder if we might ask for some emails on this subject, if there are families who feel strongly one way or the other about whether they would like to see their school board gathering in person.
It would be interesting to see how many of our participants who participate now through Zoom would be willing to come in public and in person. Because Damien, I hear you that setting the example is very important, but I think it depends on what cohort you're talking to, what example we should be setting. Because just because we can doesn't mean we should. Because we are all adults, and we can assume that most of the humans that would come to the public board meeting would also be in that, adult category, or at least in that teen category. And we know that the older the person is, that sometimes that can affect how their bodies react to COVID. And so, from my perspective, setting an example could also be remaining safe and allowing as much accessibility as possible. And again, just devil's advocate, I really would love to get back together in person with people, with groups. But whether that's the right choice based on where we still are with COVID variants, I don't know if that's the right choice for right now.
I'd still just throw out, Anne, that we still have a policy restriction to limit how many people can be there. I understand I'm just one, and I'm probably outnumbered, but I think it's a good thing to start moving back to normalcy, just like we're doing at school. It's, you still go to the grocery store, you still go shopping, you still take your garbage out, the garbage man still picks it up. We're all doing the things that we need to do to stay safe. And we especially know that if we don't feel well, we shouldn't go out. So I think that, the days of having a common cold where people didn't care and they would go out and just, walk around, I think that's kind of been a cure now that we're going to start seeing as a change in culture. But my point still is that I think that it's a good thing for us to actually get back to take those baby steps forward and moving back and getting a consistent way of doing things. And like a hybrid is a good baby step back. At some point we're going to have to do it, and I'm just saying I'm okay with it now. I guess because I'm out there and I'm going to Canada, I go to, have to go to Montana. I don't have the luxury of just staying put, but I'm doing everything I need to do to stay safe. And if I ever came down with any of the effects that are symptoms of COVID, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. So that's kind of where I'm at. I feel pretty strong that we can do this.
Yeah, heard and acknowledged. Absolutely. I absolutely don't, take umbrage with any of the things you're saying. I absolutely agree with all those things. What I'm saying is that, and I speak with fully understanding of my privilege, I don't go to the grocery store right now. And so I just want to speak to that cohort as well. So thank you for listening to those words.
I have some thoughts as well, but I'd like to get Jordan's input also. So we make sure to hear from everyone.
Yeah, I also acknowledge like both sides of it, but I don't think I'm leaning towards one. I think you know, once everyone's describing their thoughts, it's really hard to like be able to pick a side.
So it sounds like the logistics for trying to be in our normal boardroom would be difficult.
It'd be,
setting up
it'd be
those-
small, right? So again, I worry about, and I'd love to see some more comments. We've only gotten a couple. Many of the folks on the list of attendees have been routine attendees. Some of them in person, some not. You know, much more now that we've been remote. Once again, I think the logistics will be very challenging for the sound in overflow or the sound in an auditorium. You know, we have a microphone. Typically, when you're in an auditorium, we get our students quiet and one person is talking. The idea of a board having conversation across the space, yeah, you know, I just see some barriers to an effective board meeting in public. But again, I get it. I get the idea that we want to set an example. And as I said earlier, I think there are many ways for the board to set an example that it wants to be involved with it. You know, members want to be involved with teachers and see people and demonstrate their commitment. It's a very controlled environment in a classroom, right? 15 students, 1 teacher, same cohort. Especially at the elementary level, it gets a little bit more spread out when we get to the upper level. It's just different. This is a meeting in public. So you want to be able to have all of your public there. And then the idea of you have the public there and you also have remote status with 2-way communication. You know, again, it's folks, if you use the want to communicate, please use the Q&A because the chat does not stay once the meeting is over unless we save it. So would really appreciate we can read that stuff out loud so that it gets into the record. But
yeah, please
I
do
think
comment on
the other group that I'm thinking of as well with that request of not being able to limit the amount of public that come in is I'm thinking of our custodial staff and the risk that that would put them in. I think it's a different conversation between us as a board meeting and projecting that onto Zoom. But I would have concerns of asking our custodial staff to clean and sanitize when they don't have any control of who the people that are coming in are. And I know that most of us are doing all of the things that we need to do. We're wearing masks, and I think our county numbers show that. And I appreciate the work that everybody's putting into there, but we've been able to shift these numbers by staying in smaller groups. And I think the idea of having a public meeting goes against that.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that the points that everyone's been making so far. The accessibility point that Marnie brought up was a great thing to keep in mind for those who have difficulty hearing. The setting examples that both Damien and Anne brought up from different sides of it, I think that those are really important things to weigh. And what Andrea brought in about both the janitorial staff and just adding additional biomass, as it were, to the school buildings. I think that those are all really, really things that weigh heavily on my thinking. I would personally be more comfortable if we went in. I would personally be more comfortable in an auditorium where there was a lot of space. But I understand that does, as Dr. Moshe said, have issues with getting sound from the board to the auditorium as a whole. I do want to reassure folks who are listening in that we will be continuing some form of online webinar or Zoom or something like that throughout this, throughout the pandemic, because it's clearly been bringing in a lot of comments, a lot of participation, and we value that greatly. That's not the issue here. We would certainly not be cutting out the Zoom, even if we could. And as the list that Dr. Moshe put up there says, we can't. We have to include online as well. I do think it would be good for us to show an example of what we're asking the staff and students to do, if we can do it in a way that is logistically sound and physically safe. Those are the things that, those two matters are what weigh on my mind about whether the cost in effort and actual financial cost would outweigh the example being set. And that's something that everyone's going to have their own calculus on. One person may think that $10,000 in sound equipment, I'm pulling that number completely out of thin air. Please don't quote me on that. It is totally worth it to bring the board and community in person. And someone else may think that that's far too much. And so I think that that's something that we're going to have to think about each on our own. We do have a bunch of opinions from the community that I would love to share. Is there anything that the board would like to say before I do so? Or Dr. Moshe?
I think just the last thing I would say is, it's one thing for me to make a decision that I feel comfortable, right? And for me to come, but it's another conversation to ask somebody to feel comfortable with my choice. And that's what I feel like we would be asking custodial staff, teachers, and students to do on a much larger scale. And so for me, I think that that's, and I think this is funny, right? Because I was the one who was like, hey, we should probably have this conversation. But I think for me, that's the changing point. Is it's not about whether I feel safe. It's about who has to sanitize the area that I'm in. And I say that knowing that I go into other school buildings and I go and I support other students in other buildings and in other counties across the state. And so is somebody else going to be comfortable with me being in that role, even if I am?
I appreciate that perspective. I also just share the sentiment that there are multiple ways to be engaged in the school buildings. And as a newer board member, I'm looking forward to learning more about what is an appropriate way for me to visit a school and get more firsthand experience of our education that we're providing for our students. And so I'm certainly very eager to connect again with our students and with community in many ways, but I don't think this is the only way to do that reconnecting. And I don't think this is the most responsible way to do that reconnecting for those reasons that are cited about the sanitization of the space, the energetic and financial cost of providing and sanitizing that space, and then the additional added risk of bringing potential exposure to COVID into the buildings while we're trying to create a very controlled environment to keep our students and families and staff as safe as possible going forward. So if I had to check my gut right now about this issue, I would say that for reasons of safety, health, and accessibility, and creating a board meeting that is audible and invitational for more families and for more board members, meaning I'm not sure I could hear in an auditorium. I would say right now my gut is saying that the online format is more of service at this time. I
very much appreciate it. I'd like to, before we make decisions, I'd like to make sure that we do get the community input.
I would just like to add one more thing. And I know that the issue here is very different than the issue of our children coming back to school. We have talked about for a long time the social emotional impact that the staying home has had on our students, the engagement through the electronics, the wanting to have social connection. Those are all really important, and it took us a while to get our students back, and we know that, and people really wanted us to bring our kids back. The purpose of a board meeting in public is for you to be able to engage with your community as a board in front of your public. And so the purpose of a board meeting is very different. And I really do understand being all of you and the superintendent and me being role models, being out there, being, on the first day of school, making sure that I said hi in every classroom, showing up with my mask on, and leading by example. This venue isn't as I said earlier, the only way for you to do that. But what is your purpose for wanting to do this? Because if it's engaging your public, and I haven't looked at the comments, so maybe folks feel very, very differently, but you've been, as a board, engaging your public and answering questions and wanting to have that engagement. When we go back to this in-person format, it will be 3 minutes, you make your public comment, thank you for your comment, and you move on. It's just a very different form of engagement. So I would just encourage you to be thinking about why you want to do that, and to be sure that makes sense to you. And I know you've all spoken, and so have I. So I'm done.
Well, I would add, Dr. Mocha, the reason why is because of what you just said. If we don't, then there's no reason to. We can just stay the way we are throughout history. Why ever go back?
Why? That's exactly true, Damien. Why?
But that's the point. We do need to go back. We do need to get back to normalcy. We need to get back to social interaction. We do need to do that. We all know it. We know ourselves.
Of course, we all need to do that, and we want to see each other and be in community. But my point is, right now, the logistical issues that you have to accomplish in order to do it safely in this COVID environment will be very different when we can go back to normal, have a public meeting, and still have you engaging with your public via Zoom. And that's the issue that I started with, is the logistics are pretty heavy lifting. Once again, we will handle the logistics if that's what the board is directing that we do. It will take our effort to do that, and it's not a flick of a switch, which it would be if you can just have a board meeting in public, not take all of the precautions that are required right now, and also offer a Zoom environment so that folks can participate. That seems abundantly clear to me, that when we go back in person, the Zoom option has to stay, because you're getting a tremendous number of attendees that way, and it's convenient for people. People don't have to worry about childcare to be able to come to a board meeting. They don't have to, not have dinner and sit for 3 hours while the board meets, and then go home and worry about homework and all of the other things. So there's a benefit to the opportunity for people to participate online.
Right, and it's still going to be there, and we're going to need to move towards that no matter what, is what you're saying, is that if.
Yeah, and right now it's a really heavy lift. Does it have to be now? That's the question before you. Can it be try it over the summer, do it when I don't know, maybe it is now. Maybe right now is the board's decision. I know that we've got some things to do to be ready. I can't promise you that in 2 weeks you can have a board meeting in person.
Right.
That might be the issue that we haven't discussed, and that is the issue of how long would it take us to prepare the right spot in the right environment and have the right equipment and everything else in order to enter back into a hybrid. I wasn't suggesting that it happened tomorrow. I didn't think, because Brooke obviously said his $10,000 amount. I mean, we're
That
going to
was-
have to meet. I'm kidding you, Brooke. You know it. We're going to have to meet certain parameters. So I wasn't expecting it to happen tomorrow, but I think that in a month or two that we certainly could be there and have a plan in place and move back towards it. Because certainly we have to meet things, but I'm saying I'm all in favor of headed in that direction.
Damien, I can speak professionally really quickly to those logistics issues as a professional who works with auditoriums and has also, has experience on stage as a speaker. I want to hear what our public has to say as well, of course. But just really quickly, the infrastructure of setting up an event is challenging. And it's a multitasking event, and it takes a lot of people and it takes a lot of equipment. Right now, none of the auditoriums on this island are functional. They don't have the custodial staff. They don't have their sound equipment running. They don't have their tech people employed. So it's certainly not as easy as flipping a switch. It's about rebuilding the infrastructure that it would take to put together an auditorium that could function auditorially and optically, so people could get the best bang for their meeting buck. And so it's not, and so, we could certainly talk about, some backwards planning. Maybe we want to have our first board meeting live in June, May, whatever month we choose. Well, that gives whoever's running that auditorium space the time to create a functional space that's ready for the public. And so I think that's a really fine idea, to come up with some calendaring around, where and who and when, and have a plan. But it's certainly, I can speak for WCT and say we could not put together a functioning auditorium for a group of people that was safe, where everyone could hear and everyone could see and everyone could participate in 2 weeks. It would not be possible without a lot of bump from, just financially and logistically. So I like the idea of calendaring backwards from a specific time.
Yeah, I'm curious. Now you have me curious, because you're talking about the theater, and I know Brooke's been trying to figure out the theater and the number of people that you can house in the Clyde to meet the phase 2 requirement.
So the Clyde is 255 seats, and we can only fill about 50 to 55 of them. And that's assuming groups of family groups. That's not 55 individuals. We could probably seat 25 individuals in a 255 seat auditorium. So there are significant challenges even just there. I really like Anne's idea of at least doing a logistical survey, find out what it would take to do this, and where the ideal place would be, keeping in mind Marnie's concern about being audible for even those with difficulties hearing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you could do it in the boardroom as long as we had enough overflow space. Doesn't
Right.
have to be an auditorium.
And I don't know if it's logistically easier to be in an auditorium or set up that overflow space with the two-way communication, video and audio.
Mhm.
So these might be questions that we need to answer before we can get back in person. Because like Damien, I agree with Damien that it would be very good for us to be in person and setting that example. But I think that we definitely need more logistical study before we can do that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Marnie.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm very interested in hearing from some members of the community who are on the
Yes.
call this evening.
Yes, that was just what I was going to say, is unless there are any more immediate comments, I want to get to the community comments. Wendy Hastings from Freeland says, can we use the gym for meetings? So that's something we will absolutely be discussing if there's a logistical survey or that sort of thing. Kim Hodges says, a couple of thoughts. Number one, privacy regarding Zoom-led meetings has been an issue around the country. Is there documentation that parents and students sign to ensure privacy is protected? What are the ramifications for violations of this nature for a student and or parent? I assume that means for classes rather than the board meetings, because the board meetings are in public, so there is no expectation of privacy at a board meeting. Two, having board meetings available via Zoom has been a great option that would be great to see continue in the future. What is the plan when in-person meetings are resumed? I agree very strongly that this has been incredible to have for the community and for me to get information from the community. So I think we should be continuing this as long as it's feasible, because it's, yeah. Hopefully we can come back to the question about privacy in classes, although I know that Dr. Moshe addressed that somewhat, but I'd like to get through the questions and comments about this topic right now. Amy Goodman from Langley, have you asked your teachers and you have asked your teachers and coaches to return in person and adapt. The school board should also make that commitment. I don't disagree. And I think that you can see that that's certainly weighing heavily on everyone's mind and has been brought up specifically by several of our members. Olivia Batchelor, thank you very much, Damien. I would be someone that would be willing to come to in-person board meetings depending. I think it's sometimes very hard in a Zoom to truly get a sense of the conversation. However, I also think keeping it open to those on Zoom is necessary too. Yeah, not being able to actually look people in the physical face has been very difficult for me. I know that Anne in particular has also mentioned that, and other people as well. Kaylin Murray from Clinton. One of the COVID silver linings has been that it is so much easier to attend these meetings in a virtual setting. In this case, participation has improved being online. I think the concern for students is that participation online has decreased meaningful participation. I think that that's referring to classes again. And Kaylin, if I'm wrong in that, please correct me. I agree 100% that we've clearly gotten fantastic participation online. And I think that that's very much a silver lining of this. And I'm running through these really fast. Board members, feel free to interrupt me if you have something to add, or Dr. Moshe as well. Amanda Potter Clinton, my biggest thought on board meetings is that I very much appreciate them being on Zoom. I can participate while I'm at home with my child. I'm fine with them continuing to be all on Zoom. As a staff member, I am fine with keeping them on Zoom and setting the example of staying home and not hosting a gathering. To Anne's point earlier, yeah. There are examples on both sides. No matter what we do, we are setting an example. The question is what example we want to set. Kathy Ireland, Freeland. I don't think we should introduce the risk of having a school board meeting in public. I think the meetings should stay remote. Let's limit risk for a community where we can. To Andrea's point, very much so. Bethany Flister, I think it would be great to see our board and superintendent leading by example. If a person feels the risk is too great, they have the Zoom option. Aubrey Waldron, I agree with Damien. I think this is Betsy Hofius. Yep. School board meeting. I'm learning the staff. I'm learning the staff by their addresses. School board meetings on Zoom seem to me to be one of the silver linings of these extraordinary times. Has attendance by the public been different on Zoom than in the old days? Very much so, Betsy. It has been much better. I would hazard a guess to say double-ish. Dr. Moshe, check me on that, but
Easily.
yeah. And more opportunities for participation, as Dr. Moshe was mentioning, that we can actually answer questions because they can come in discrete sections. Gwendy Hastings, I get that we should set an example, but the structure of the classroom with 12 students versus the size of the meeting are very different. I think the meeting should stay on Zoom until the restrictions statewide change. Just my thoughts. Amanda Murphy, my family has attended many more board meetings over Zoom than we would have been able to in person, so we've appreciated it and will continue that way. I would expect we've had higher community participation due to this flexibility. Chantel, I believe this is Chantel Petty. It would be great to meet in person for board meetings. I currently go into the school 2 days a week and will be in 4 days soon. With us all being adults, we can each wipe the podium when finished and or use sanitizer before. It would be great to continue to Zoom the meetings as well, so that as many people as possible can attend, thus being equitable. We'll absolutely continue with Zoom. Yeah. Bethany Flister, sent out a survey to staff and parents to gauge everyone's preferences for board meetings moving forward. I think that this is a decision that should be up to the board. And the question being that whether the logistics make it worth doing so. The logistics, and to Andrea's point earlier, the risk. So I don't know that I think that a survey is necessary. I am interested in hearing what other board members think as well. Betsy Hofius again, maybe board members can show solidarity with teachers who return to the classroom by a prearranged classroom visit. I, for one, as a returning teacher, do not expect acknowledgement for my decision to return to the classroom. I would love to get us back into the schools. Love, love, love. My favorite thing of my first year of being on the board was getting to do school visits. Personally, I don't think it's worth the risk of adding additional adults who have additional contacts outside of that circle at this point. I am anxiously awaiting the time when that opinion of mine changes. Amy Goodman again, parents still have the option to participate from home if you meet in person, but the example is set for your staff. Kim says we answered the Zoom piece, good. Deborah Davies noted who she was, but not a question. So Deborah, if you could put a, repeat the question that you were trying to ask in there, that would be great. Dave Davenport, Langley, as a parent who needs to help get dinner and bedtime routine going, a Zoom meeting is optimal for parents of younger children. I can understand a hybrid maybe in the boardroom with limited 10 to 20 in-person attendees with the Zoom for online attendees. That would be great, but based on the information shared, I don't know that we can limit attendance like that. Valerie Brown, as a teacher, it is necessary for me to be at school to implement hybrid learning. It is not necessary for the board to be in person to perform their job. I would never ask someone to put themselves and others at risk to merely set an example. I appreciate that sentiment. I do think there is value in setting an example, but I think it needs to be weighed versus the risk. Deborah Davies, Clinton, thank you, Deborah, for getting that in again. Please do not bring the public into our school buildings. Staff has worked very hard to control the environment. Staff is already very nervous. Bringing others into the buildings would cause more concern. Thank you to everyone for the input. I know that I certainly appreciated it very much, hearing from the wide array of opinions there. Do board members have any more comment based on that input from the community?
Brooke, I would just say that Dr. Mocha made the remark that on the chat, maybe if you read those two, then they get into the record. You don't have to worry about.
Yeah, one of those was repeated into the Q&A, but yes, Mary Perrick says, yes, I would love to see the board meetings return in person. Thank you, Damien, for the reminder. Anything additional to add by any of the board members? Yes, no, done. Before the comments, we were talking about getting logistical plans in place to see what it would take to do it, to decide before we decide whether or not we want to do it. Is that something everyone thinks is a good plan?
I think we have a good plan of from information gathered of what we need to look at to meet everybody's needs, staying out of the school, limiting janitors, risk, hearing. I think that we at least have a framework now that we can look at and see if we can build upon this and put it all together and meet a deadline that we can work backwards from. I think that's it's at least Go ahead.
I would ask that we start that logistical planning in April. We are asking staff to currently bring kids back, and those plans are going through March. And I think that this would detract from that planning. And so if we wanted to look at logistics, I would suggest starting that in April.
Would that be helpful for you, Dr. Moshe?
Certainly more time, it would be helpful. We've already started a discussion here tonight, so I know I'll be gathering information. One of the pieces of it will be included in the logistics will be the cost, right? We want to know what the cost is for retrofitting, whatever we have to retrofit, if anything. I mean, I have no idea what these things may involve. We had talked about, if the board remembers, and that's where you pulled the $10,000 from. It wasn't really out of the air. We had looked into doing a Zoom setup for the board back before COVID was a word. And the sound system implementation would be significant for that. And again, I got some preliminary information for you about the space in the room, and we went through the FAQs. I didn't go so far as to get a cost. That will take some time to do, and some conversations to have. So yeah, it certainly would be helpful to bring it back in April. I don't know that I'll have it for you in March, but I might. I'll bring it back when we get it.
And I need to clarify, Joe, I was suggesting that you start that work in April so that you can spend March focusing on bringing kids back. So like I would not anticipate hearing anything about logistics until like May.
Yeah, well, understood. I mean, we've got it because it's not me, right? I'm going to have to ask Ian to do work, and he's deploying technology, and I'm going to have to ask about, JJ for information, and he's, getting custodial staff up to speed on all of our logistics. So I appreciate the forethought, Andrew. I really do. So that sounds good.
And I'd like to say that I appreciate the fact that we have so many people participating in our meetings now through Zoom as compared to before. But I also understand that part of that reason is these are extraordinary times. And for the last year, we haven't had the ability to meet in person, and everybody wants information as to, what is the school doing? What are we doing in fighting COVID? And when are we going back? And there's a lot of things that information that people are looking for. But as we get back and it becomes more normal again, I would imagine that we are going to lose participation. But that's just my thought process. I would hope that we didn't, because it's been great seeing all these people here. I'd love to see them in person too occasionally, but just bear that in mind, that part of the reason that we have high turnout right now is because of the situation that we are facing.
So I have two more very quick updates when the board's ready to move on to them.
Well, I'd like to suggest that we put this back on the agenda for a workshop. To Andrea's point, maybe in the first workshop in May, March, April, yeah, May. If that's suitable for you, Dr. Moshe, for the logistics. And we'll both try to remember to make sure it gets on the agenda for that workshop. And then at that point, we will have information and we can make a decision on trying to, as Anne was suggesting, trying to work back from a goal.
Maybe COVID will be done and we can just, anyway, we can hope, can't we?
I think that's it for board meetings. So
Yeah.
you have two other points. Dr. Moshe, you had two other points before.
Two other points. Damien asked last meeting regarding the Waterman Field, Coach Lear Stadium at Waterman Field. It is up on the stadium. So it is noted that, it's Waterman Field, Coach Lear Stadium. So that is done. In terms of the memorial for Rini, there is work in progress for a plaque and a sculpture and a dedication, and it all was put on hold for COVID, but it's still in the works. So more information on that, but right now, nothing is planned for a ceremony for that.
Okay, thank you. Jordan, school board, student representative report.
Okay, starting with the elementary school, this month they did a random acts of kindness week. And so one of the things that they did for that was that they held an assembly and they asked students to submit some videos of random acts of kindness that they did. And also they, some students wrote some letters to just local firemen, the police, and just elders in our community. And another thing that the elementary school has done is a lot of teachers have been implementing Black Lives Matters programs into their classroom. And that's definitely something important, especially in this month, since it is Black History Month, and we do want to honor that. And then hybrid started this week for first and third graders, and we were able to have, I believe, like a little bit over 100 students to come back. So that was interesting. The middle school, the 5th and 6th graders are having a Cougar Pride assembly soon, and it's kind of going to be the same thing as elementary school. They also invited students to submit videos of them doing random acts of kindness. And then hybrid starts for them the 8th and the 15th. So there's just been a lot of prep work for that. Moving on to the high school February, I would say, was a pretty busy month for the high school. For athletics, we had our first season start this month, and we're already having competitions this week with volleyball and soccer tomorrow. Boys tennis has their first match on Friday, and cross country has their first meet on Saturday. And then we are in phase 2, so I believe football needs to be in phase 3, so they are planning to play home on March 12th. And then last Thursday, we had our parents and athletes and coaches meeting, and basically we talked a lot about COVID guidelines, you know, making sure that everyone's safe and able to follow these guidelines in order to have these competitions. And one thing that I want to note is that Southwood Bay High School is in a new league this year, the Emerald Sound Conference. And so it includes most of the schools from our last conference, but we also are combined with other 1A schools from the Snohomish and King County. So that's one major thing that's been happening at the high school. I know a lot of students are participating in sports, which is great. And a lot of people are just excited that we are able to have a season. Clubs this month have been working on a lot of plans on when we do return onto hybrid, what they will be doing, and just like how they can do stuff when we are in hybrid. And so the student wellness group this month, they sent out some e-cards to, I believe, sophomores, and they centered it around Black History Month and love. And so they were just trying to be inclusive, making the topic love rather than Valentine's Day, because not everyone celebrates Valentine's Day. And some of the club leaders have also been planning projects with the coalition. Our Interact Club this month had a guest speaker come to talk about music, and another guest speaker from our Rotary West Side to come talk about a Yale opportunity, which is Youth Adventures in Leadership. So it's just a leadership opportunity. This year it's going to be all virtual, so we were able to secure 150 slots for our school. So anyone who's interested, especially like student leaders, or anyone like that, is able to participate in that. Our Days for Girls Club, they're continuing to make out their period kits and to be sent out to Africa soon. I know that they are planning to meet in person soon to tie-dye some underwear for the kids. And also, since we did start second semester, they're working with our middle school health teacher to present to those classes.
And then our ecology club this month has been working on making compost and recycling bins. So once we do get into hybrid, they can be put into the cafeteria. ASB this month, they started with a leadership conference for students who wanted to attend and just learn more about time management skills and just anything related to that. And the ASB has done a lot of prep work for going back into hybrid. One note is that we're planning to do a drive-through for our students on March 12th, which is the Friday before we return. And so we're welcoming all students to come by, and we'll be selling masks. And yeah. Another thing that ASB and also the leadership class has been planning is to film a campus video to just like help promote what hybrid is going to be like, and hopefully it can help students make a decision on if they do want to plan to return back. Some more general information for the high school as well. Like I said before, it is Black History Month, so a lot of students as well as the leadership class took to the use of social media to help promote resources for our school. And especially the leadership class has been doing that because we do want to make sure that we know that South Woodby is a place for inclusiveness. The high school this month, we started our pre-registration as well as our high school and beyond plan, and that's in the works. And so we do return to hybrid on the 15th, and then I did ask a lot of students, and a lot of students have basically two main concerns, but I'm sure they're going to be cleared up as soon as more plans get out. But those two concerns were making sure that everyone is following those safety protocols. And the other one was making sure that everyone is wearing proper masks. And then the last thing that I just had to talk about was seniors. Seniors, they had a senior meeting this month to just talk about graduation and other stuff like that. And so many of them are excited for hybrid, and a lot of them are disappointed with graduation, specifically the limit of 2 people, but a lot of them are still hopeful about COVID getting better. But in general, a lot of students are happy that hybrid is going to happen.
I need some clarification on the last one. Graduation hasn't been decided, Jordan. Why are people thinking it's a limit of 2?
A lot of seniors, so they did have a senior meeting, and personally, I just asked students if they had any concerns, and that was one of the concerns that I received.
Great. Okay. So just to clarify, I don't think Mr. Patton has come up with a plan. We're not sure what graduation is going to look like. But the limit of 2 may be about attending a sporting event. Because we're limited to the spectator size. I'm just jumping because you said limited 2. I don't know if that's what they may be thinking about, but I know that Mr. Patton hasn't made a plan for graduation. We don't know if it's inside, outside. We don't know what the state's going to say, maybe guidance that we have to follow. So that's definitely still up in the air. Great report, though. I love the work you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. As always, I really appreciate hearing about things going on at all the different schools. That's fantastic that you're able to gather that. Do any of the board members have questions for Jordan? Seen a lot of shaking heads. Just good job.
That's such a great thing to hear what's going on in the schools. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah. And like I was saying about the USL, it's very valuable to hear what's important to the students right now, because that can help us focus where we might want to pay particular attention. So thank you. Next up, we do have a question that I'll get to before board reports. That's from Kim Hodges regarding Regarding Weeks High School, Mr. Eager's recording privacy regarding Zoom-led meeting has been an issue around the country. Please expand on measurements by the district regarding documentation that parents and students sign to ensure privacy is protected. Additionally, what are the ramifications for violation of this nature for a student and or parent? Being in middle school, I didn't see this type of documentation. Perhaps it was for high school. We did address some of this, but Dr. Moshe, if you could address it in particular for middle school, if you know, or if we can get a report on that at our, get a report out to Kim on that.
Yeah, I think I can respond to Kim directly. In terms of measurements by the district regarding documentation that parents and students must sign. So there is a form that the high school provided to all of its students and families. That's what I was referring to as the documentation. Ramifications for violation would be disciplinary, and it's in the disciplinary handbook. We don't discipline parents. The violation would be students. And that's the issue of folks honoring the requirement that videos are for educational purposes only. The question regarding middle school, I actually don't have an answer for right now. I don't know. But I assume since Kim is a middle school parent and didn't receive it, it probably didn't go to the middle school level. So
might it be worthwhile to get
every student, I'm sorry, Brooke, but every student has to sign an acceptable use form, and that's part of it. And again, the students have a student handbook, and in the student handbook, it also refers to making recordings that are unauthorized, and that there is disciplinary action that would happen if that was found out. Controlling whether someone's parent records a video over the shoulder of a student, if that's in fact what happened, that is not in our purview. So these are difficult questions, and they are more than just us. It is why we ask our students to use only their first name. Students are not required to be on camera. In this particular video, it was one student whose face was shown with his first name. He spoke, but only the teacher otherwise. So again, that's what I saw on that video that I watched in its entirety.
Well, and as Dr. Moshe said earlier, she did request that of the person who sent us the video that it be taken down. So that's what we can do, I believe, about things that have already happened.
And my obligation to the school board, I looked into the legality because there was a question around FERPA, and I understand the legality from the school district's point of view. If individuals have questions regarding this, the district answered it for the district's purposes, if that makes sense.
Do you know, or could you find out for us if the agreement that was signed, the use agreement, if that's available somewhere to the students and parents?
Not sure if it's on the high school website, but I just asked for it from Mr. Patton and he produced it. So I'm sure if it's not on the website, we can get it up on the website.
Excellent. That would be fantastic, just so that people can refer to it. Thank you. Now.
Actually, I'm sorry. I just got clarification. It is on the district website under students. And it's also in the technology handbook, which is online. So
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, do we have any board member reports? Anything folks would like to share or talk about? Seen a lot of shaking heads. I don't have anything myself. It's late. I'll wait another moment or two to see if there's anything else from the community. But with that being said, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.